All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your teacher workday to meet with me about our last meeting of the semester to review our targeted intervention strategy. As you can see here, we've got the agenda for you, and then you should all have open the data and the lesson that we created, our intervention strategy. So just to review our previous meeting notes, we decided to focus on in-classroom interventions due to the difficulties that we have with getting seniors to stay after school and lack of transportation options. We decided we were also going to narrow down our focus even more because 440 was quite a daunting number of students to focus on, and after some reflection and some consideration, I've narrowed it down even further to something I feel is more manageable. The intervention strategy we decided on was called a semantic map, and this semantic map dealt with the topic of, is America a world leader or a bully? And we determined that our success will be determined by the student test data on the expansionism and World War I test, specifically the first 15 questions, which dealt with the expansionism unit. So I provided you guys with the data. I asked you to bring your laptops because it was, a fairly large amount of data, and I wanted us to be able to see kind of like the colors for the growth in the areas that we need to address. So that's why I did that. Are there any questions before we get started? Okay. So I'm going to jump into narrowing our focus again. After speaking, we decided to focus on 3 or more at-risk indicators. I learned how to go into eSchool Plus to look up the indicators, what indicators our students have as at risk, and I focused on 3. I really focused on specifically if they had failed a class and if they had failed an EOC in high school. If they failed like an 8th grade or a middle school STAR test, I kind of let that one go. But if they were LEP, and definitely if they failed a high school test, EOC, particularly English 2, because that's the one they had right before us, and they're probably going to be retaking that again. And that eliminated all of the APDC. Again, one of the reasons that prompted this is because I was looking at my list. The junior class valedictorian is considered at risk because he's LEP. The kid's not at risk.
Yeah.
So that was one where it would not behoove us to focus on this student when we could be giving attention to other students. So the 3 or more at-risk indicators, that brings our number down from 440 to 136. And that also eliminates all but 1 K-level student as well. So I did include K-level in this because we are trying to identify at-risk. And then also I've included Jackie and Martha's protected SSL courses, even though there was a decent number of them that were their only at-risk indicator was that they were LEP. But, we do have the largest number of at-risk, and we have asked for those courses to be protected. And they're still protected, right? They've done a better job this year of making sure. Okay. So ultimately, 136 is our total. Mrs. Blackwell has 33. Mr. Castro has 23. Ms. Garcia has 34, including, again, her 1 SSL course, and Ms. Russo has 47, including both of her protected SSL courses. So, yeah.
Yes.
But most of them are just those, I would say more than half of those are in your SSL courses, and you're already paying attention to those. You've been great with those students all year, and the data reflects that. So, good job, Ms. Russo. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah, snaps from Ms. Russo, for sure.
Take compliments very hard.
Well, you shouldn't. I've actually, again, spoken with Ms. Williams about the work that you've been doing. So I just want to give a shout out to anybody who's listening about Ms. Russo's, the work she's been doing. And Martha for leading the U.S. History team and definitely agreeing to let me support my harebrained ideas about what we can do to improve our students' success on our test. So we'll give thanks to Ms. Smith and Jonathan later. I just want to go out of the way to make sure that there was gratitude shown for them. So I think that's a more manageable number, 23-ish per person. Again, what do y'all think about, as the people with the two highest, what do y'all think about the numbers? Is 34 and 47 more manageable? Clearly it is.
Yeah, it is. A couple in each class that you can small group with that we've been talking about and do stuff like that with, so I think
Okay.
it's a lot better.
Yeah, at least we have a list of kids
Mm-hmm.
and that we're going through and trying to see,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because if it was up to, I think, us individually, our list would be longer, because we'd be like, oh, okay, well, this person
Mm-hmm.
struggles here
Yeah.
and there, and, you know, based on unit tests and stuff.
Yeah. I think too, one of the reasons why I wanted to be insistent on being the one to narrow it down is because it's kind of like I don't know these students,
Mhm.
and so it's more, hey, the data says this is a student that needs help. Clearly, you know your students, but also like I'm a big believer in like a rising tide lifts all ships. The lesson that we'll reflect on shortly, will help regardless of proficiency, regardless of average or not, because we're doing it with the average kids in mind, but it's a review strategy, it's an intervention strategy that will help all of those other students. I did have a question for you, Jonathan. Would you like this data for your kids, for your team?
For world history?
For world history, I could reach out to, or you could reach out to Mrs. Atler, and I can work with you about narrowing that down for yours. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can look at, I mean, obviously we don't have the data from STAR test, but we can look at DPM questions, and we can
Mhm.
look at those students who are in those at-risk categories, and kind of look at their data compared to other students and see, just like we're talking about with US history, see what we can do to help those students, whether in school or in class,
Mm-hmm.
conferencing, small groups, or after school time. Yeah, I think it could be helpful.
The other reason I think too I would like to do this is because then we can start the trend from world history to US. And if we're, last year we identified this student is at risk in world history, okay, we've got the data carrying forward showing how they performed.
Yeah.
Because we are experiencing, as the team was discussing yesterday, we are seeing the ramifications of having 2 long-term subs last year in US history. Although I think it's getting better, because I've had some students in those classes as well, so.
And it can also give some context to you guys going forward in your year, because like if we track them from world history into US history, and we track them from the beginning of the year in world history, we can see if they've taken strides and the level that they're at going into US history is actually really impressive and come a long way, as opposed to just like, oh, that's their level, I don't know.
Yeah.
We can see that, oh, they've actually improved a lot to get to where they are now, so we can just keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
Or just vice versa, we can look at if it drops, for
Mhm.
whatever reason, we can try to address that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, having the data instead of in November, having it in August as y'all
Mhm.
start,
Yeah.
looking would be helpful, where these, some of these kids might already be identified, so that you could get a little bit faster jump on
Mm-hmm.
and strategies and helping them,
Yeah.
rather than almost, towards the end of the first semester.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Then that way we could be more intentional at the beginning
Yeah.
with our interventions,
Mhm.
things like that. So I'll make note to email Ms. Adler, or Jonathan, you can email Ms. Adler. We can work the logistics of that later, but then you and I can meet to narrow down that list.
Okay.
And we can share that with the team. And then maybe I could ask one of the CICs to cover my 4th period and meet with y'all briefly
Yeah, and talk about it.
and talk about it together.
Sounds good.
I'm sure that they would be happy to do that on an easy day.
Yeah.
Ask CIC to cover 4th.
I don't know if we have any.
No, the team that I would
Yeah, I
meet
was
with would
gonna
be
say,
the one
yeah,
that's
I was
figuring it
Well,
all.
yeah, but I was thinking of like sociology, like I was trying to think
Yeah.
of some of our outlier people, but they're not there
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns about who our focus is going forward, all the stuff that we're doing? Okay, I would like to move on to strategy reflection. So if you would go to the Canva about is America a leader or bully, the semantic mapping activity. The objective was to be able to review the unit by ranking events that occurred during U.S. expansionism and determine whether the U.S. was a world leader or a bully. The students were instructed to make their selection beforehand, and then working as a part or a group, the students were going to fill out their semantic map, filling out the information on the graphic organizer that is found on slide number 7. And then as a class, y'all shared, was this a bully? Was it a leader? So, on a scale of 1 to 10, Ms. Russo, how would you rate this lesson? And why would you give it that rating?
I'd say an 8.
Okay.
This was great with my SSL kids. They really enjoyed it. I think in reflecting it with our team as well, I think the narrowing down, especially for on-level and our kids at risk, kids that we're focusing on, maybe just like with the how many options we give them for evidence and stuff, limiting it a little bit. But other than that, they had great conversations. They did really good overall with it, I think.
Okay.
Good review too.
Ms. Garcia, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it?
I think an 8 as well. I think this is a really good way to like review with a small group, and that's why I didn't give it a 10, because as I was working with some groups, especially my at-risk kids, you know, when there's no, I guess, other person in the room, double checking or just monitoring, making sure. Sometimes some kids may not want to participate, or they may just be, you know, doing their own thing. And from what I recall, they did have an issue with the what is your position, like they didn't understand. So
Beginning.
yeah, I think maybe explaining what that means a little more. But and then the boxes, that was too many. For the examples, we wanted them to look at. So what they did was they had resources that they would go and open in Schoology, and it was just examples that all things that we learned about, and you can find them on slide 6. And it's some of them are events, some of them are policies, the taking of a territory, a war. And so they had to go through each one, and it had like a mini summary, just like a refresher for them. And then they had to pick 3, or depending on the teacher, I told my kids to pick 3 that they would use, that there were clear examples or evidence of the U.S. either being a bully or a world leader. So I think there was moving parts, and I think maybe that's why some kids were confused as to like, they wanted me to tell them like, is the U.S. a bully or the leader, instead of them getting to that conclusion on their own.
So one of the first things that came to mind for me was leader and bully. Those are 2 clear words for us, I think, because we have a lot of context of what that means in the world stage, the global stage. But I think for some students that maybe they need more clarification on what the word leader and what the word bully means in these contexts. So I don't know. That might be a barrier. Not fully understanding, like, oh, what does my teacher mean? Like, what is a leader?
Which is why I think, at least in my SSL, it worked, because they see our country like from the outside. So they either have seen it as a bully or have seen it as a leader.
Yeah, perspectives has a lot to do with it. The kids that got it, you saw the little light bulb go off, and they're like, I get it. This, you know, the ones that were confused, I think they were expecting there would be one correct answer. And I think sometimes, especially with our at-risk students, whenever we give them, like when we ask them to look at it from someone else's perspective or POV, I don't know if they're apprehensive, but sometimes they're kind of confused they think that, no, there's only one point of view and that's it, like,
Yeah.
there's only
Yeah.
one correct answer. And I guess, I don't know if that's what they're used to, or that's what they think I'm looking for, but I've noticed that.
I do think it's a trend that they expect their, and I think this is one of the reasons why students do struggle in our course is because we are asking them to take positions and they may not feel comfortable with their own knowledge to take that position. And so they want to be told a position, they can figure it out. Like if we said, Jackie, your table is leader, Jill, your table is bully. Oh, well, then they can find the things to support that. But I don't think, I think maybe defining, the next question is what would you do differently in order to get closer to a 10? I think maybe that clarification of the context of the words may help.
Yeah.
And just to add on to what you're
Mhm.
saying, I think that would be probably a good modification if we do this next year for a next group of students, or if we
Mhm.
use this strategy for a different unit and topic,
Mm-hmm.
having the kids like assign them, like this table's a bully, this table's a leader, and then have some type of interaction where they have to find someone that's like the
Mhm.
opposite, and then they can practice what's point of view.
Yeah.
So I'm taking the position of I'm a leader, so I'm giving you all the reasons why the US is a leader, why XYZ, and then Ms. Smith is taking the other position, so I'm listening to her position, and she's telling me why XYZ. And then maybe, I think practice is needed for them to start developing the skills.
We do have, and I was just thinking about it because I was making the lesson, that New Deal POV, one of the things I'm doing is having the students take a position and they have to communicate their position, and they also need to write down and record their partner's position. And so maybe just kind of a way to scaffold up to this is when we talk about things like assimilation, or when we get to the progressives, have them assigned a side, and then now they're used to, or like then slowly work in that concept of like, no, like you have an opinion, I want you to have an opinion, there's no right or wrong answer, you just gotta tell me why.
Yeah.
And I do think that as a team, as a department really, all of our lessons are like, in terms of safe space and sharing, I think we're all pretty good about like, no, like we're not gonna laugh at you, we're just gonna make sure we want you to share, we want you to discuss. So maybe that's just something that we do is scaffold up to like, no, you're eventually going to have to pick a side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably where we lacked, where we didn't give them practice. So when we hit them with, all right, take a position, like you said, some of you mentioned like maybe they were afraid to take a position because they didn't know, maybe they didn't feel confident about what exactly they were taking a position on. So I think that what Philip said is true. If we can get to the point like we're introducing it and they're practicing, and then eventually the training wheels come off and they have to be the ones to pick a side.
What was what was our like cognitive hook for this lesson? Did we have one? I don't recall.
Let me go to.
Second question, meantime, while you look that up.
Mhm.
So just to clarify, in the events section, these are all events and policies that you had gone over and learned about before.
Yes.
And you had short summaries that you had
Mhm.
the students read that just reminded them of the topics of the events or policies. And then they went through this page and then filled out their thoughts on it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me see if I can pull it up. So I can show you like an example of one. And so they would go through it and they would have information, and they could go to the next event, open door policy, and there was like a video they could watch if they wanna read it. Panama Canal.
Mhm.
So even if, let's say, Jonathan was absent, on the day that we went over Panama Canal, even if he didn't know, he could get that information from there. And so I think our hook was, at least in my class, I can't
Mhm.
speak for everyone else, I believe it was explain what is a leader and a bully, like when you
Okay.
think about, what does that mean? And just having the kids share out, can you show me, what a leader would do or act, or,
Mhm.
just trying to get them just thinking about what that means. And then for at-risk kids, and I know for SSL students, explaining what does that mean, like a leader and a bully. And I think a lot of the students know what a bully is, but I don't know if they know what are some qualities or traits of a leader?
Asking them to find examples maybe of
Yeah.
who they think they see as good leaders or bullies.
Yeah.
Give
Yeah.
examples of those.
I think to again use what you learned about yesterday with cognitive hooks, I think that would be a good one because it doesn't require them to have any prior knowledge. It's going to prime their brains in ways to think about leaders and bullies, and then eventually prompt them to apply what they've discussed already to what the United States is doing, and I think that might help contextualize it a little bit better. So maybe that's just one of those like intentionality. This is built in at the
Yeah.
beginning, maybe 5-10 minutes of class, depending. Okay. And the students had no problems talking. It's usually a pretty good sign that they at least understood it somewhat, that they were feeling comfortable.
SSL had good conversation. Mod 5, but
Mhm.
other than that, yeah, it was fine.
Yeah, from walking around the room, there were good conversations. And then, what I noticed, at least with my mod classes, was I did have to small group with my mod students
Mm-hmm.
because they were confused
Yes.
about what exactly I was asking. They were stuck on the, what's my position?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I lost them there. So I had to go through it and we had to go like, let's look at the first event. And then, okay, what do you think about that? Do you think the US is a bully or what was it? A leader?
Yeah.
And they were like waiting for me to say the answer that
Yeah.
what they think I'm gonna say. And I was asking them like, what's your opinion? And so I think for some of them, they were stuck on that. Also the evidence, like what do you mean evidence?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because we played around with the, I guess, word that we were gonna use for that.
Mm-hmm.
Really what we wanted them is to like give the information as to why, like if you say, let's say Ms. Smith says the US is a leader, she would go and find those 3 or 2, whatever events, and then she would find the information that led her to that position. So I think the US is a leader because of the Spanish-American War, because the US was able to blah, 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 blah. And she thinks it's a leader, and the motive was it land. We gave them options. It was like land, I think military, I can't remember the other ones. But it was several options of motives of why the US was
Yeah.
trade participated in that event or war or
They
policy.
like that part.
They liked that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were selecting that, so that column and the leader or bully column was fine. It was just the evidence. And then if I lost them at what's your position, then
Okay.
it was just
I think
downhill from there.
these are problems that I see at all levels in world
Mhm.
history, like from L to AP. I see that problem with all of them. Like just taking a position and being able to back up an evidence is
Mhm.
such an important skill in social studies, but it's easier said than done. I think everybody struggles with that to a certain extent.
My concern is that this is a skill that is not just for social studies, but in life,
Yeah.
on just taking a position, even like with what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, my concern is if they're in the 11th grade and they can't do that,
Yeah.
you know, in 2 years, they're gonna be voting, and
Mm-hmm.
do they even know, like, what is my position, or what's my opinion about something? Or they're just
Or
gonna
why
be,
do I think that?
why do I
Yeah.
think that, or who am I just voting for someone because my parents told me,
Yeah.
or I saw
Popular.
TV, or whatever, and not, I mean, I try to always keep that in mind, especially when kids tell me, like, why are we doing this? Why am I learning about this? I'm always like, okay, I'm teaching you skills that you don't need for outside of school.
I think there's something to be said that, like you, John, I'd be willing to bet that even when I ask my dual credit kids about like, well, why do you think that? And I don't know. Like,
I don't know. I read it.
they shrug, and I think maybe that's something. Maybe we can build in some cross curricular stuff there, and I can reach out to the English about like, hey, do y'all have writings where they take position? How have you introduced that concept? And maybe we borrow the terminology of when because I remember, I don't know if this is still the case, but like when we were learning to write, it was called a persuasive
Yes,
essay.
Yeah.
persuasive.
Yeah.
And so maybe we just kind of, in order to introduce, when we say position, you're trying to persuade. You're trying to, like you're writing a persuasive essay in English. you're trying to persuade individuals about is America worldly or a bully. So maybe that's some cross-curricular stuff that we can use as like an entry point into when we talk about taking a position, we mean try to persuade somebody else that you are of your side. And then with the evidence, hey, what's your proof? What would you use to prove that America is? Maybe the word evidence is tripping them up, like you said.
Yeah, maybe proof would be a,
Proof, yeah, because we were
Yeah.
saying evidence or example, and then we didn't like either, and so we went with evidence, so.
Yeah.
and maybe proof
Proof would be
yeah,
easier.
if you're trying to prove what
Mhm.
your position, maybe that would resonate with them more.
Yeah, cause many of them took a position at the start and then were trying to prove it and couldn't, like as they were reading, and so then that's when we got the switch up.
Yeah.
I was like, if you're having a hard time trying to prove it, you might have to switch your change it.
Well, and there was, and stressing that, cause that was the other part of that paper.
The semantic, yeah.
Yeah, the semantic mapping was, did you change your position?
Yeah.
And that's perfectly acceptable, that you started out trying to prove your
Something.
position and then realized, oh wait,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, that's a perfectly acceptable thing.
And making it clear to the students as you move through the lesson that that's totally fine.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
as like you guys said, as you go through the lesson, like if you're changing, if you're finding it hard to prove your initial position, then switch it and prove why. Yeah.
And again, it's gonna go back to students being comfortable with, there's not necessarily one answer,
Yeah.
and maybe that the original position that I picked wasn't the right answer, and that's
Yeah.
perfectly okay.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing, that it's perfectly okay with this.
I will say the trend I'm noticing too is this group of juniors is a particularly black and white group. They really struggle with
Great.
gray, and they really struggle with putting themselves into other people's shoes. That's kind of aligns with what I was seeing in my classes, where I was like, okay, imagine you are writing an essay about this. How would you use these historical documents? They're like, I don't know what you mean. And I'm like, well, you know, like, this is the question you're answering, how would you use them? And so I think this is just a very black and white group, and maybe in order to meet them where they're at, we give them a position, hey, you gotta prove this, or can you prove this, yes or no? And we'll go from
Yeah.
there.
And if you can't, then what does that do to your thought
Right,
process?
right.
Yes.
Right,
So they're practicing changing their minds.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I think that was good. I really liked that. We'll come back to the overall review about using the strategy again, but I would like to move on now to the test data. So I will say that this is the first 15 questions of our 40 question test. And I've subtracted 2 of them because they were 2 new questions, and there was nothing to compare to. There was no comparative point for those 2 new questions, and I just wanted to, the whole point was to compare how they've grown this year's group versus last year's group, and so I just wanted to remove those 2 questions. At the very top, we've got our categories, our meets, master's approaches, and did not meets. Our overall student performance is up 2% from 2023-2024. It was 59%, which would be classified as approaches, up to 61%. And this continues a trend that we're seeing all year in U.S. history. Every single test we've had has grown, which is very good.
Yeah.
It's nice to see the confirmation of the work that we're doing is paying off. So we've grown overall 59% to 61%. Again, not super high growth, but I do think it's good growth. I mean, all growth is good growth.
Can I interject?
Yes.
The did not meets is -2. Or I guess that +2 is good.
Yes, in
I'm
this
sorry, I'm
case,
just looking at the,
No, I've got-
numbers and it doesn't equal 100. But I guess that's a good thing, so that is.
yeah, our did not meets
Green?
went down 2%, so we're gaining 2%. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That
I guess
might-
it should be green, but it should be -2?
There we
-2?
go. I'm just gonna put 2.
Because green is
9.
good.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry.
So we said, the number of students who did not meets in 24-25 was 20, and 23-24 was
Right. Oh, yeah.
22.
So it's -2, but that's a good thing.
It's -2, but it's a good thing.
Yes.
Yes.
I was gonna say, it's green happy, but
Happy green.
negative, yeah.
Okay.
That's
Let me-
okay.
let me-
It's great that we went
Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry.
that they,
Sorry.
yes.
Negative is a good thing in this. I don't know, whatever. I'm just gonna leave the numbers there.
No, I see what you're,
Okay.
we get it,
Fewer did not meet students.
yes.
Sorry for
which
the
is good.
unhelpful internet.
No, it's okay. It's okay. We're fine. It's just I need to continue to refine my data process. That's all it is. Approaches went up a lot from 71 to 89. However, it came at the extent of our meets. So, as we've discussed, we've done a good job of getting the students to approaches. We need to focus on the meets and masters. We did see a growth in the masters from 2% to 14%. And this data is just the on-level classes.
Okay.
Just the on-level classes, including the at-risk students. This does not include K-level, because they have a separate data report. So mostly growth with the approaches going down, which is going up at the expense of meets, which is unfortunate, because we do want to focus on that meets. So yeah, that's kind of just the overall holistic look at the data, and then we'll go through the questions super quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on them. Just to take a quick note, question number 1, we've got a political cartoon with Teddy Roosevelt holding his big stick. That was a decline of 1%. So it went down, but this is a question that they struggle with year after year. Question number 2, which of these events occurred in 1898? And these are all new, these are also including our new EOC style questions. Which of these events occurred in 1898? Select 2 answers. We see a growth of 6%. This was actually the second most growth a question we see on a question on this test. So we're getting some good growth there. Question number 3, we see that involvement of the Spanish-American War, acquisition of Hawaii, the open of world policy had the effect of gaining overseas markets. 3% growth, which is good. Sorry, I was gonna keep track of how many we have. So, 1, 2. Another drop down, this one is from Alfred Thayer Mahan about the influence of sea power. Stayed the same, which is good. You know, sometimes no growth is the best growth. This is one that we discussed changing and getting rid of, if I remember correctly, and we ultimately chose to focus on other ones. So we did see a little bit of a growth this year, 2% on this particular question. Again, which is good. The next one, number 7, we saw a decline. That is miscolored. Let me fix that now. Again, another Mahan influence of sea power. This one was just a reading, and it was something they struggled with, as we discussed. Another one that we see a decline, number 8, about the open door policy. Not quite sure why, because it's open door policy is kind of it's just Asia and it's just China, so I don't know why that went down 6%. Maybe that they can't.
I will, not to sure, but I was just going over test corrections
Mhm.
with the student last week, and he picked Japan as one of the Philippines as one of the options.
Okay.
He said he didn't see that it said China, and like he just picked the Philippines.
Okay.
'Cause he thought that's where it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it a highlight?
It's a map hotspot. Yeah.
Hotspot, yeah.
So Japan, the
So
Philippines,
geography skills
China.
were low.
Yeah, geography skills, and that goes back to the idea we've talked about redoing the map lesson again. So, because they struggle with where things are.
Yeah.
We've got another no change. This was also the worst performing question on the test. This is one that we probably should have changed. I will say, I don't want to spend too much time on this one. It's because the wording of the answer is C, and it's there must be 2 Americas, one that sets the captive free, then one that takes a once captive's new freedom away from him. Like, that's Mark Twain, and our students are not, regardless of lexile skill,
Yeah.
that's one that's just gonna trip them up every single time. I think,
It's a pretty hard question, honestly.
I do think next year that might be one that we just change at this point.
Mhm.
I think we just need to like, nope, we'll find another anti-imperialism question.
It makes sense that about a quarter got it right, cause
Yeah,
that's
Yeah.
just a guess between all four.
Yeah.
it's if
I'm
you,
gonna say this.
yeah, if I were to pull up the data, it would be all over the place. So, but surprisingly, no change. So I guess something's done right there. Question number 10. Another events of the events of 1898. We're seeing growth there by 2%. Number 11. They can read maps. I will say this. They can read maps. And Jonathan, I know that's an emphasis on y'all's world history is map analysis. So they did show growth on number 11 about the Panama Canal. Number 3, I think this is one where we saw the intervention strategy really come into play. Sorry, what did I say? Number 3? I meant number 12.
Okay, I was like.
I said I was looking at the change percent.
Understood. Okay, I was like, I think we're on 12? Okay.
Yeah, number
Sorry.
12 is one I think we did see the intervention strategy come into play because it doesn't explicitly say bully leader, but it explains some of the things that a bully and a leader did that they would have read about. Extending foreign influence, military intervention, displays of strength, things like that. So I do think that that's one we could look at directly. Question number 14 showed the most growth on the entire test, 9%. So they're understanding economic effects. And then, do what?
That was a good lesson too.
Yeah. That was one of the new Google site lessons we did, right? Yeah, definitely a good lesson. And then number 15, another map. And so overall, we had 8 questions showed growth, 3 questions showed decline, and 2 questions stayed the same. So this matches kind of overall what we saw from the test, the overall test data. Growth across the board, which we'll always take. So I have a couple questions that I would like to answer, or I'd like to ask y'all. What does the performance on this test say about the instructional design of our units and how we're teaching?
Well, speaking from the outside, just you said the Spanish-American War lesson was really successful, and that showed in the test questioning. So I think the lesson planning is paying off.
Yeah, I think definitely all of the Spanish-American War questions showed growth. So
Yeah.
that Spanish-American, because that's one we fiddled with for a long time. It's one that we used to have one very specific way, and now it's changed. So we're seeing lots of growth to Spanish-American War.
And I think we're, at least with this unit, I think we did a better job this year of like telling the story
Mm-hmm.
and it making sense chronologically as it's happening. And we were able to spiral back to, like, I was able to bring up the Spanish-American War multiple times, 1898 multiple times.
Yeah. That's one of those hot days.
Could we maybe have introduced the idea of bully versus
At the start.
at the start?
And then have them decide at the end.
And that would be at the end. Maybe that would ease them into the idea of, like, hey, here's your position.
That would kind of frame their thinking throughout the entire lesson or unit.
Yeah.
Do you want that? Because it would get them thinking like, okay, every lesson, like, bully or leader, bully or leader. Do you want that?
I don't mind that.
Yeah, I don't think I would be opposed to that. I think it would be interesting to see, maybe have them, after the Spanish-American War, pick a side, and then, hey, did you change at the end?
Like how, as America's motives
Mhm.
from the beginning of expansion towards
Mhm.
the end remain the same, and they look at all that as well.
Because you could argue that, depending on how you feel, the Spanish-American War is an example of both, depending on how much credence you put into, like, the sinking of the Maine and things like that.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say where the semantic mapping came in, because this is one of the reasons we chose this lesson, this is a very we have what, 4 days for this unit? And if they're gone on the expansion is a map day, just if it's, or two days, if it's 1 day, they miss half of the unit's content. So I think this was a good opportunity to catch kids up the semantic mapping, where maybe if they missed a day because they were, you know, just didn't feel like coming to school that day, or they had, you know, other stuff, or they were whatever, they weren't at school for whatever reason, the semantic mapping was kind of like the catch-all. Hey, you were gone, great, it's okay, like you said at the beginning, if you weren't here, you still got it.
Yeah.
Because
there's
we
no
Yeah,
still
there was a
remain
time for
information.
reteaching.
That
I
was,
kinda like that, just as a general concept.
yeah.
Yeah, like a reteach
For like
opportunity.
a lot of units,
Mhm.
at any level,
Yeah,
I kinda like that idea.
yeah, and Jonathan, that's something that you and I can sit down and look at too, is, you know, look at your calendar, where do you have those days, where like, I think the thing is, we were like, oh, we have a flex day, and like, okay, but flex days are nice every now and then, but if we've got a flex day after, you know, I'm not saying we had it,
A 4-day unit.
but if we have
Yeah.
a flex after a 4-day unit, okay, then you know what, we have a 5-day unit now, and our flex day is our reteach, recapture,
Yeah.
summarize day.
But like every unit could have like a big question, and that recap day is like, okay, let's address the big question.
Mhm.
Yes.
Like in this unit, it's that question, bully or leader, but every unit has a big question. There's like a dressing day for that.
I've actually thought about taking that concept for second semester for my dual credit, for my units, because we have so much to get through and it's all gotta be through the lens of like the EOC. But I've thought about taking the concept of with a theme that I can apply to this unit, with a question that I can apply to this unit, and then at the end, let's summarize our thinking. And that's something I was actually going to kind of play around with later today, looking at the lessons I have. So I do like that idea of overall, hey, what's our theme, what's our question for this unit? And then we have an activity at the end where you're applying that question.
And I also wanna say that, like, for this unit in particular, it just lended itself to it
Mhm.
more easily.
Yes.
And then the fact that it was like a 4-day unit, in the past, like Philip was saying, it's a flex day, so I know when we talked, in August about this year, I did say I wanted to be more intentional with the days that we have with the kids, and then I'd just be like, oh, today's just a
You owe me
catch
your-
up
yeah.
day,
Yeah.
you know, whatever, which those are necessary too, don't get me wrong, but it's also, you'll still have kids that need to catch up, but choose
Mhm.
not to,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then you're too busy trying to put in grades and help others and things like that, so.
Also too, this idea of a kind of catch or of a recapture day is gonna help, especially as we get into EOC retesting, or we're going to lose, like, you know, we're gonna lose 7th period on Friday because we have a pep rally. So
This would help those students.
this would help those students for
Mhm.
7th period, like, hey, we didn't have a chance to talk because y'all were at the pep rally, which is great, you know, school spirit, I appreciate that. We have, administration who's trying to raise our school spirit, but it does kind of put us in an awkward position at times about like, what, you know, 7th period, if they miss it, what are we doing? So, okay. Our students were successful. I think we kind of, I think they were successful because the lessons were better. I do think the semantic map helped.
Mhm.
Again, we saw growth across the board, and last year, like we said, it was a 4-day unit. And if you miss a day, you miss 25 to 30% of the information. What do our students need help with?
I think we already started talking about it,
Mhm.
the POV and
Yeah.
like being able to be in, like even the countries we talk about, like Puerto Rico, Philippines, like we see their perspective,
Mhm.
which I think the Spanish American War did a good job of. And I would bring up multiple times, like throughout the unit, like, hey, well, were the Puerto Ricans happy? How did they feel? And stuff like that with U.S. expansion. But
Mhm.
yeah, just like POV for sure.
And then also circling back and giving them confidence to take stances,
Mhm.
Yeah.
to have an opinion.
Jonathan, do y'all have any point of view stuff? I know that you've got a lot more information to go through than we do, given just like,
Not as much as I'd like. Once every 2 or 3 units,
okay,
we'll do something that could be an RA or something like that, but no, not as much as I would like.
and
That's
maybe,
something that we can work into our
Yeah.
curriculum.
and we can reach out to Mr. Salazar and Coach K about, hey, do y'all have any, because I do think they do some stuff in world geography about picking a side, but maybe looking at, hey, what are y'all doing? How can we encourage students beginning in 9th grade to pick a side? And then Jill, do y'all have anything in Gov or in Eco? I know that yours is again a very specific.
I guess go more.
Nah,
It would be Go more than Eco, but
yeah, I mean, Gov obviously has
Yeah.
a ton of, pick a side kind of things. Eco, not really off the top of my head that I can think of.
okay.
I mean, yeah, I
But-
just.
But definitely maybe we go through the government
Yeah,
level course and
I was
see
gonna
what.
say, the government on level, yeah, would definitely would have opportunities for picking a side, but especially with the on level, since our class is personal finance literacy
Mhm.
plus economics, a lot of ours is not really picking a side. I struggled
Yeah.
with that earlier, trying to figure out things, we were looking for something, and it's like, it's really hard to do in eco, because we're just, I mean, we're comparing credit cards, but it doesn't really.
These are a MasterCard.
Yeah.
Yes, I like pick
Pick
a
a
side.
side.
Yeah,
Take a
I
side.
mean, and they did decide like, a little bit of, would this be good for, someone starting out or someone with
Mhm.
bad credit, but it's not really like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's not a
definitely.
point of view, it's just, so, yeah, it's a little bit more.
So I
difficult
just
for
pulled
us.
up, I just went to a random lesson inside of the government class, and I found that it's not quite the same, but it's the idea of should Texas have a part-time or full-time legislature?
Yes, we've done
And
that one.
that's an example, I think, of you're picking a side, part-time,
Yes.
full-time.
Yeah, cause
um,
then they have yeah, cause then I know that they've done where, I remember that lesson. But yes, it's, what's the proof of that, and talking about, the pros and cons of part-time legislature versus full-time legislature, so.
And maybe that's another way that we can introduce this, like, pro-con is picking a side based on, like, I think pro-con could be used for evidence, pro-con could be used for picking a side, maybe that's just one of those things we begin with when we get to like westward expansion. What are the pros and cons of westward expansion? Pros, now then you can go, okay, your point of view is you're a Native American, what? And I think that would be a good way of kind of restructuring, especially with the relevant application, because I know that we've talked about redoing that a couple times, is here are the pros and cons. Do they outweigh if you're a white settler? Do they outweigh if you're a...
You could do it with having like a Chinese
Mm-hmm.
and have them do roles: Chinese immigrant, Native American, white settler, minor,
Mm-hmm. Because one of
business entrepreneur.
one of the things I know that we've mentioned is like they like scenarios.
Yeah, they
Yes.
do.
They do like the scenarios. So maybe that's just kind of when we're doing scenarios, we do it with the idea of, hey, you're taking a position based on this person's point of view, and that's a good way to introduce all that. I also think that's a good way that leads us into the final question: what next steps can we take to improve student achievement? And I think we just kind of talked around it. We'll look
Yes.
at what we're doing look at what government's doing, and then get with more vertical alignment, since that was one of the other purposes of this, is identifying where we can more vertically align. What are the things that world geography and world history and US history and government can do? That way it's not a surprise when we ask them to pick a side. So, kind of our overall review. Do we feel that the strategy of the semantic mapping is worth refining and using again in a future unit?
Yes.
I feel like that's
Yeah,
For sure.
pretty ubiquitous. I think that it's a good lesson. Again, the data supports it. I think maybe next time we do it too, they'd be more comfortable with picking a side. Hey, we've already asked you to pick a side, let's pick another one.
Yeah, more practice.
And maybe I can include that, maybe the New Deal POV, I can amend that a bit more to be not a semantic map, but like a pro or anti-New Deal.
You would do teacher
Yeah,
or Venn diagram,
yeah, T-chart Venn diagram.
and then they have to guess, before I take a position.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could say, you're pro New Deal, you're against New Deal,
Yeah.
or like this table, that table, and then force them to turn and talk with one, or share, or share with somebody from the other table.
Yeah.
So, that way you're moving them, so they're getting that, you
Mhm.
know, and they're also like listening to the other person. And then
Mhm.
for our SSL students, they're practicing English, and then for our SPED, we can support them too.
And I'm thinking about borrowing the same kind of semantic mapping graphic organizer. That way I think there is something to be said about like a comfort of, we've seen this before, we know what to expect. And like you said, maybe we reduce it from 6 to about 4.
Yeah,
That'd be good.
Okay.
because I think that's where, at least I messed up having so many boxes. They thought, do I have to fill them all out?
Mhm.
And so it was more of I need to fill these out, than more than like me interact with my partner.
Okay. Good. I think again, we've identified students. I think it's gonna help. I will send out that email, after this meeting to all of the US History team about theirs. And Jill, I'll CC you and just so
Great.
you're also aware. And then Jonathan, you and I can discuss which one of us wants to reach out to Atler, about getting the at-risk and then refining it from there. That way your team can also start focusing on, hey, these are the kids that need a little extra help. Thank you, Jonathan and Jill, for being a part of this meeting. Your input has been valuable, and I appreciate you guys for taking the time. But yeah, that's it. I think we're good. I think we've got good strategies. I think we've got things to focus on as we close the semester, and then we've got a new list of new game plan as we get ready for the EOC in April. So, go team.
Awesome. Woohoo.
Go Spartans, baby.